If you feel comfortable, we certainly invite you to turn on your cameras. I think it will make the class a lot more fun to be able to see one another and support one another and chat with one another. So if you're comfortable, we certainly encourage that. And we're so glad that you're here. It also helps us know that you're here.
Exactly. Not that we mind talking to names on the page, but
They're beautiful names.
of course.
Well, welcome.
We'll give you, let's give it a minute or two. Can those who are willing to share and talk, let's introduce yourselves. Or so far you only know that it's called, that we're talking about language lost in translation. So thoughts, is it filtering in? What might that be? What might be that we're talking about? Hmm.
Hmm.
For those old enough, there was a song back in the day, things that make you go I see some smiles. Okay. All right. What? Those of us of a certain age. Yeah. All right. Sam, should we start?
Sure.
All right.
I hope there's people here.
You know,
I hope I I hope that people are just having their
I'm
convenience.
thinking that they're like, the way I've gotten with Zoom stuff is if I don't have to be seen, I'm not going to be, because that way, you can
Very
scratch your
mysterious.
ear or whatever as needed.
Well, oh well, yeah, yeah. I won't
All right. So
say
I
that.
hope. So I do ask, and I think you're all done it. That you've put your real names or whatever you want to be called is your Zoom names, because it'll help. We will end up with discussion, so being able to say who you are is very useful. Um, and if we have visitors today, that would always fantastic, and love to know who you are. If you're new-ish, if you haven't been here in a while, same thing. We're not going to go through introductions for everyone, because then we wouldn't have time for our beautiful, wonderful adult group, which we're super excited about. This is our first, no, second, no, I don't know. I can't count, which I think I say this every week. I don't do math. But we are doing one of our back to basics, which we're so excited about. Terminology 101. So what does that mean? We're talking about lost in translation. We're going to be looking at words in Judaism and Christianity that we think we know, or that we struggle to explain, or that we still have questions about and maybe are kind of nervous about asking. So, safe space. You
Yeah,
can ask us and this group, because that's what we're here to do: explore and learn about the things we assume, language wise, and we think we know, and that we don't. So, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to get going.
yeah. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, and words, as we know, matter, and far too often in our day-to-day lives, especially maybe in our interfaith families, things can get lost in translation. And maybe you have some examples in your of moments in your own life where that has happened. And we want to show you just an exhibit A here, fresh out of ancient Israel. So just see this short clip here that we hope demonstrates that. So, as you may know, a little bit of Monty Python. And as you can see there, even the simplest words can
Sorry.
get lost in translation, such as blessed are the peacemakers becoming blessed are the cheesemakers. It can alter the whole meaning of a phrase, or in this case, maybe could have even affected history.
So, in preparation for the adult group, or as we continue, consider your own experiences with religious terms that have been tricky to understand or explain or to fathom. You can write in the chat if you have a few if they've come up to you, and I mean, if you are aware of them, or as you become aware of them, please add them to the chat. We'll get to them today or not. If we have a huge or even a list of stuff that we can't get to today, it just gives us future room for future growth. So write them in the chat, and let's see what you've got.
Awesome. Great. People are throwing those in there. This is so great. Keep them coming. And for those of you who are thinking, gosh, I think I know about every term in Judaism and Christianity, don't worry, you aren't alone. Rabbi Debbie and I actually, we feel pretty confident that we know just about every term from each other's traditions. I mean, we both felt especially called to go into the ministry.
What? Wait,
So,
Sam.
yes.
I don't like interrupting you, but actually, in Judaism, we don't use the word call or called when we're talking about what motivates us.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. Thanks. Well, so I was saying that Debbie and I we know everything about each other's traditions, basically.
Wait, Sam,
And
I wasn't quite done.
okay.
Sorry. The other thing is we also don't use ministry in Judaism. That's a real alien word to us. So I just
Oh,
wanted you to know that.
well, that's good to know. Thanks. So I guess ministers, we use that word differently. Thanks for telling me. Well, seems like we are really on the same page with a
Yeah, I
lot of
mean,
things.
well, we agree that sharing good works is that would be central to both of us.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think good works that is important, but actually in Christianity, that word faith is a really important word.
Faith. Yeah. Jesus teaches a lot about faith in the stories of his life throughout the whole New Testament, right?
Yeah, Debbie. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to kind of stop you while you're on your roll, but really the stories of Jesus's life are really located in the Gospels.
The Gospels. Right. I knew that. I think. Maybe I don't know as much about all of this stuff as I thought I did. So, back to basics. You and I are going to get a bit out of this too, aren't we?
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. This is a really great opportunity for all of us to get to learn together. And I'm glad to see that there's words popping up in the chat. Keep them coming. Keep on thinking about what words that you all are curious about. And we hope that we can get to them today or soon. And I hope that our little conversation has inspired you and really all of us to think through maybe the words that we thought we knew, maybe we need to learn a little bit more about. So Rabbi Debbie and I really want this class to be a space to learn and to grow and to have fun together, so that things don't get lost in translation. So let's dive right in.
Okay. So, Sam, not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot. Can you please explain to me the difference between priest, pastor, minister, reverend, deacon? I mean, I just officiated a wedding earlier this week with a deacon, a Catholic deacon, and he was talking about his wife and kids. And, as far as I knew, Catholic clergy didn't get married. So I'm just really confused.
That is a great question, Rabbi Debbie, and it's a long one, so I'm going to try to give a real short Cliff Notes version. So Reverend is really the title given for ordained Christian clergy, and minister and pastor are kind of the more colloquial terms for that. So I am the Reverend Samantha Gonzalez Block, but I'm also a minister or a pastor. In the Catholic or Episcopal traditions, those are denominations within the Christian community, and obviously Catholicism. The word priest is used for those ordained clergy, and you might hear colloquially like father or mother is a term that they can sometimes be called as well, or pastor. So priest, Catholic, Episcopal, pastor is more for other Christian denominations. Now, that word deacon is a really, really fun word because there's a lot of differences in the word deacon. And I've even found myself at IFFP sometimes saying deacon meaning one thing and it being understood another way. So even within Christianity, we can understand deacon differently. So deacon comes from that Greek word diakonos, so servant. And for Presbyterians, which I'm ordained as a Presbyterian minister, deacons are lay leaders. They are not professional clergy. But they are kind of ordained within the community, and they are people that feel motivated to care for the community, to help the sick, to visit people in the hospital, to provide meals. So they're people that really kind of are up in front, that want to be there to serve the community. For like people like Lutherans or Methodists, they are kind of ordained into that role. So that is their professional job. So they're called ministers of word and service. So again, they're sort of those people you see up front, but it's their profession. And then for Catholics and Episcopalians, it can be sometimes the first step to becoming a priest. Maybe you're sometimes ordained first as a deacon, or it can become your vocation, and you don't become a priest, but you remain as a deacon within the Catholic tradition, or obviously for Episcopalians, you can be a deacon. So you are working in the church, but you're not like officially a priest. So that gives you just a little sense of some of those terms. As you can see, they're kind of complicated within Christianity. So if you ever get confused, just ask questions. And there's plenty of other terms that you might also have some questions about. But just to kind of keep us rolling, I want to throw it back at you, Debbie. And, I hear a lot within Judaism about all of the different sects of Judaism. So Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative. Can you help us understand a little bit about what those words mean?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So, starting with, you said sect, and then other people say denomination, and we love to argue. Those two words already cause some strife and issues in Judaism, because there's the thought that it's all one religion, and maybe there's variations in practice. But in the real world, I think those are fair concepts to put to it. Denomination, I guess the term that Jews mostly use is movement. So there's a conservative movement, the Reconstructionist movement. But, okay, so what do they mean? Because that's where you asked. Traditional Judaism kind of encompasses Orthodox and conservative movements. They stay as close to as possible within the traditional interpretations of the Jewish law, which has a Hebrew word, which I'm not going to throw in here right now. And the differences between them are on how far to adapt to modern life. Then you have progressive Judaism, which would be Reform, Universalist, Renewal, and Reconstructionist. And in these, it's not just adapting the traditional style to modern life, but reimagining, or not reimagining, thinking more deeply about how spirituality and religion fits into Jewish life, and staying true to the substance, but changing them so that they're more accessible. Much more use of English and song, and they're very different, each one from the other. But this way, people can express themselves more. It's also allowing people to sort of say, my observance is at this level, but I believe in the philosophy of this one. And it's expanding, I think, the overall feel. Now, all of that is mostly in the US. Isn't that fun? So the rest of the world doesn't quite have it this way. In Israel, you have different branches, movements. You've got the ultra-Orthodox called the Haredim. You've got the religious Zionists, who are also very observant, or Orthodox as we would call them. They just kind of, again, look at it a different way. The Masorti movement, which is the traditional one, which would include Americans, modern Orthodoxy and conservative, and probably the other actually denominations, and then the Hiloni, who are the secular Jews. So that's different in Israel. And then the rest of the world kind of doesn't pick and choose, but has different variations of this. The difference between the movements is level observance, methodology for interpreting texts, and the role of criticism, and how much, kind of what I talked about today, is how much you can look at the words and derive meaning from them that might vary from the traditional thousands of years old points of view. Okay, I could go on and on, but we have other things to cover.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'm seeing people also sharing some of their thoughts in the chat, and that's awesome. Thank you for that. So let's get to another question.
Okay, more questions. Oh, I have one
Okay.
because this confuse no, it doesn't confuse me. Sacraments. I know there's what, 7 in Catholicism, but different numbers in other Christian denominations. And what does it mean? Give
Ooh,
me
how
that.
much time do you have? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So sacraments. So in Catholicism, there's typically 7. If we have any Catholics in the room, you can even throw them in the chat if you're feeling kind of fun. Can you name all 7? And for most other kind of Christian denominations, there are 2. So all right, people are feeling really shy here. Shout them out. All right. Okay, great. Nice, nice. Baptism. Nice. Ooh, Jared just went for all. Great. Yes, awesome. So baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist or communion or the Lord's Supper, penance, or reconciliation, anointing the sick, getting married, and holy orders, which is kind of ordination. What's interesting about Catholicism is you can't really typically do all 7 or achieve all 7, because if you're a priest, you cannot be married. So an interesting thing. So there's 7. In most other mainline denominations, there are 2. Does anyone know what those 2 are? Good question. Is last rites not a sacrament? I don't know that answer for Catholics. Is it not a sacrament in Catholicism? I guess it's not. It's not of the 7.
Same
Anyone
thing
know?
as healing. Same thing as healing.
Same thing as healing. Awesome. Thank you for that, John. 10 points for John. All right, awesome. Yes, Rebecca Weiss. So for most other denominations, it is baptism and Eucharist or Lord's Supper. And those are things that Jesus has kind of commanded that people do. There's something that you physically do to to kind of complete that sacrament. And so it's something that you will often see in most churches. So there are some differences between Catholicism and mainline Christianity when it comes to understanding sacraments. And there's even nuances between Christian denominations as well. My husband, who's Lutheran, we have different understandings a little bit of sacraments. But essentially, at its essence, I'm just going to dive into baptism and Eucharist. Baptism is really about kind of the welcoming into community. There is, a baptismal font. Typically, you'll see that water where babies might be put in or fully immersed. In some denominations, you baptize as infants. For some, we know that for some, it's really important to baptize as an infant. For some, you baptize when you have a profession of faith, when you get to an age where you can say, this is what I believe in Jesus, and then you go ahead and you're baptized then. So there's even discrepancy about when. But typically it is about this welcoming into community. Another big piece of it is this celebration of God's grace, a celebration of being, and I know grace was one of the words that was up there, but being kind of freed and loved and, kind of sort of saved, but this idea of kind of Jesus sort of, taking you out of death and bringing you into new life. What's sort of beautiful about, I'll speak for as a Presbyterian, is for my denomination, it is a symbol. So we don't have any concerns around people sort of not being baptized. There's not a concern around that, because for us, it is a symbol of what is already happening in our lives, which is God's grace and God's love. So for me, growing up in an interfaith family, that I always found that really helpful, that it was something that was sort of symbolic. Also, it's something always done in community. So you do it and you kind of others witness that. So that's, again, from sort of my experience. And I can go into more nuances between denominations and things like that, if that's helpful for anyone. Eucharist or communion, think of that word communion, also kind of done in community. And it's really the celebration of giving giving thanks, and you have bread and wine or juice, and the bread is a symbol of Jesus's body, the juice or wine is a symbol of Jesus's blood. And just like in the scripture, you're there to sort of reenact kind of that Last Supper and to remember, but to also to be in community with Jesus. So in Catholicism, that bread and that wine physically change into Jesus's blood and body. For other denominations, there's different understandings. For Presbyterians, we believe kind of that Jesus is present at that meal. He's present kind of like, so again, sort of symbolically there. But again, the idea is sort of remembering God's grace, God kind of feeding us to go out and feed the world. So again, that is a very Cliff Notes Sam's version of it. And you might have your own experiences from your own families or growing up years, but just to give you a little sense about some of those sacraments. Whew, okay.
That was awesome. No, thank you. It made me think, because I always thought the sacrament had that element of conferring divine status to something, grace or whatever, that the substance of a person or a thing was actually considered changed. And I would have said, we don't have that at all in Judaism. But with your more expansive definition, I think we actually do have similar things. The most obvious, I think, is the Brit Milah, the circumcision, because that represents, I mean, we're not changing the nature of the human being, of the child, but what we're doing is it represents the covenant that God made with Abraham, and it's a ages old practice of welcoming the infant into the global Jewish world, saying you are a part of us. The other rites in Judaism are a little bit less so, because they don't. This is the Brit Milah is the one that's considered as having to be done. Although, just this week I shared a story on my Facebook page about groups of Jews who not only don't want to do it, but want support from the Jewish community to not doing it. And there's really good arguments on both sides. I'm working it out in my head. So, yeah. Apparently we do have sacraments. Again, you're making me think. So it's good. Awesome. Wow.
Yeah, it's
right. And I've been looking at the chat. Okay, I'll tell you right now, we are so not getting to all of this stuff. But
this is so great though. This is like
awesome.
Exactly what we want to see, just you all thinking and engaging. And we're gonna try to bring the spirit of your questions into other classes if we can't get to them today.
But we're gonna make you work first.
Yes.
So here's the fun part. We're going to split up into 4 groups, and each group is going to have a word that they have to work with. So in your group, you introduce yourselves and choose someone to report back. And then looking at that word, share your experiences, your personal experiences with them. Is it limited to one religion or more? Where do you see them? Is this word used in everyday life and conversations? And this comes up, are you comfortable using this word? As I pointed out at the very beginning to Sam, ministry is weird for Jews. We're not even sure what it means. It's kind of alien, so I seldom use it in conversation. But it came up for me when I worked at campus ministry, and people were like, what does that mean? So we know that there's differences. So we're going to split you up into these groups. I'll put those questions, the guiding questions, in your group chats, and please, we'll give you a bunch of minutes, let you know when time's winding down. We'll come back and talk about them. So your words are going to be, and just one per group: kosher, gospel, calling, and service. Sam, did I forget anything?
No. Are you going to name the groups with their word?
They are named, and hopefully that will show up as they're assigned. Otherwise, we'll go right back in and with the questions.
Does anyone have any questions before we send you off? Does that seem pretty clear? I put them also in the chat too, kind of what your assignment is. Okay.
All right. So we're gonna, how many people are there? 20, 18. Okay. I can't do math. Why am I the one who always does this when I say I can't do math?
And we'll give you like a few minute warning so that it doesn't suddenly close in the middle of your awesome thought. Welcome back.
Hey.
Thank you for carrying the day. I know your group was smaller. I hope that you got some good bonding in.
That's okay. Diane was having trouble with her audio, so
Oh,
Denise
no.
and I had a very nice chat about
Oh,
what
gosh.
the word kosher means.
Okay. So, well, people are coming back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Always afraid of losing people in their entirety when they go to the breakout groups, and they're like, I'm done.
It's a long trip through outer space.
And I can't help but, gosh, in person, how much interaction and, then Sam and I could have gone group to group, which is hard to do, and whatever. This is good. This is what we've got. We're working with it, and it's it's lovely. And yes, I'm trying to convince myself of that.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Is everyone back? All right. Nice. Everyone make up an original cheer for your word. Okay. All right. Okay. Great. Awesome. Well, we'd love to hear from the groups. So if we can just kind of invite your group to share maybe just some highlights from what you discussed and a definition that you came up with that you can throw in the chat as well, or you can, if it's such a long, robust definition, you can also just share with us. But and then if anyone wants to add anything or has any questions, feel free to, we'll have some space for that hopefully as we share. So let's go ahead and start with our first group, Group Kosher. Tell us a little bit about what you discussed and what you came up with.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Zader. Nice to meet all of you that I haven't met yet. Denise and I spoke about what the word kosher meant. Diane was also in her group, but she was having trouble with audio. So I will share what Denise and I talked about, and Denise, feel free to jump in too. But our word was kosher, and our definition that we came up with was following the dietary restrictions and rules in the kitchen for food. We said it was closely tied with Judaism, and sharing some experiences. Both of us are the Christian part of our interfaith marriage. So personally, we don't have a ton, but I mean, not that we don't have any experience with kosher, but I know Diane's in-laws keep kosher. So they have the two sets of different plates and follow that in their household. And then in terms of, how we've heard the word used otherwise too, there's definitely, we've both heard, it used in a slang way of saying like, oh, that's not kosher, kind of meaning it's not, that's not okay to do. So that's what we came up with.
It's great.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'd like to point out that you said it's not that they are kosher, because no, we can't eat them, but they keep kosher because it is a set of laws. So you follow the laws, they keep the laws. So I think you nailed that one perfectly. And awesome. That the word is used to mean up to specs or legitimate. I use it that way plenty of times. Thank you so much.
Yes. Is there anything anyone wants to ask or add? That was great. The word kosher. Awesome.
I two things. One, I think a lot of these words have taken on modern meanings in secular culture, and it's kind of interesting how it's become easier for us to use them, and kosher being one that's known by not just Jews anymore. The other is, I asked this question earlier, Christians don't need to keep kosher. And I'm wondering if there's a specific word in Christianity that's sort of a blanket, like we don't need to follow those rules anymore because, I don't know, because Jesus took care of it for us or something. Is there a word for that?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus is a great one. So typically, I mean, just to paraphrase as well. So in Christianity, typically the way it's talked about is the fact that Jesus came and, offered, gave himself up, sacrificed himself for the sins of the world. It's not just kind of our uncleanliness as human beings in our spirits, but also kind of the world itself. So things that were unclean to eat are now acceptable to eat. So there's the language around that. So literally kind of through Jesus's sacrifice, or through the grace of God, now all of that was once unclean is now clean. The other interesting piece of that has to do with table fellowship. And as those kind of early communities of Jesus followers who were Jewish, right, and then began to kind of bring in Gentiles into that community, as they were kind of seeking ways to be in fellowship with one another, they were also finding ways to sit at table with each other, right? Because those were the original churches, right, was just getting together at table. And so finding ways to be at table together meant that we couldn't have some that were keeping kosher and some that weren't, although many of us here are doing that beautifully. So the idea was to have a table where people could share together. And again, so taking away those laws around keeping kosher. So those are kind of two ones that here. Other people might have some other thoughts as well. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So so always having fish on Fridays. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure if that one is kind of culturally built out of that, or if that has a biblical connection as well. I'll look into that, or somebody might know from your experience or your tradition.
And I'm gonna bust in and say we got to get to the next group.
Yeah, this is so good. Okay, woo. Awesome. But thank you for group one.
All right. Who was group two? What did we have? Gospel. Who's speaking for gospel?
I know there was
Yes.
Is that Jessica?
Uh-oh.
Jess, you're muted again. Are you there?
I'm on my husband's computer and he has too many windows. It drives me nuts. Nothing, honey. All right. So notes. So gospel was an interesting one. I found it. We didn't have a lot of associations with it. We talked about gospel as the gospel of truth. It kind of seems to have a kind of multiple meanings, one of which being like reading the gospel at church. We were a couple of us had associations with the 4 books of the New Testament, but the word or message of God. We talked about like the Torah, being the teachings of God, and maybe being something somewhat comparable. And then that is it's part of the story of Jesus, but not sure. We didn't have a very strong definition per se. We more had a discussion. So, because we had all these kind of different experiences of gospel, and I brought up gospel music as an idea, like the idea of singing the words of God. But those were I wasn't raised in either tradition, but at least my association is the music more than anything. But I think of it as like a very religious word. It has like a lot of religiosity for me, compared to a lot of other things. It just seems very religious. But I don't know. Teach us. Dear Sam, teach us.
That's awesome. No, that's great. Thank you all for sharing that, and thank you, Jessica. So, can anyone name the 4 gospels, just really fast before we move on?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Ooh, all right. $1 million is heading your way. That's awesome. Yeah. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So those first ones. Does anyone know what the oldest gospel is? Ooh, this is for $1 billion.
Matthew.
If you eventually you will name it. It is.
Wait.
It's Mark. Mark is the oldest one.
Oh, that's right. He was the one of, yes, he was actually there, right?
Yeah.
Why does the list always start with Matthew?
It's just the order that they chose, but Mark
It's
is
easier to say. It kind of flows together.
It's got a good sort of tone to it. Yes.
Like, yeah.
But Mark is the shortest one.
Matthew, this isn't.
Yeah, he's kind of like the New York Times writer that like got to the, like just like wrote out just the facts. Like he didn't really prettify it and make it beautify it. And then Matthew and Mark kind of took a little from that and from some other sources. They were around the same time. And then the last one is John, which is sort of the most poetic. But anyway, there's a little bit about the Gospels. Great job. Let's move on because I'm looking at the time to the next group. Thank y'all.
Who was our next group? What did we have? I can't even remember.
Calling, I think.
Calling. Yes. Thank you.
That's I will summarize very quickly because I just looked and saw what time it is. We started by assuming that this was a Christian concept and word. And the way we started was that my dog is crawling all over me. That a calling in Catholicism specifically, because that was our Christian perspective, is for a specific service or an act, like visiting the sick or visiting a particular sick person, or a calling to become part of the community, like going to mass and doing service for the community. I kept saying decorating the church for Christmas. It's also used colloquially, obviously, in general conversations, but also it's used in Judaism, like being called to the Torah. So we explored that a little bit more, and as in so many things that we learned over the years, specifically starting from Rabbi White's teachings, there are overlaps between Judaism and Christianity. In many cases, if not all, something you're called to do in either faith is divinely inspired. So something comes besides somebody calling you up and saying, will you read from the Torah on Saturday morning? There's also a feeling internally within the person that this is something that they want to do, and that it's inspired by the divine, however you define the divine. And it is used colloquially. So we discovered that it was, while not capital C calling in Judaism, it is used in Judaism in ways that are very similar to how it's used in Christianity.
I never thought of that. That is amazing.
Yeah, I forget which one of us I should give credit to for starting to talk about call to the Torah, but yeah.
Yes. This is a great word because it has this beautiful overlaps within the traditions. And I want to throw out, if you've never heard, Friedrich Buechner writes about calling, that it's where your deep hunger, where your deepest gladness and the world's deepest hunger meet. That's where you're called to be. I think it's a really beautiful thing when you're trying to navigate a decision or discern where you feel moved, where you feel called to be. Let's make sure we get to that last group. Great job. So our final group is service. Larry, if you're muted, if you're talking.
Yes, so sorry. This is a word that we felt was equally Christian and Jewish. We were comfortable using it in our own encounters with people. The term service or services obviously can refer to religious services, but we also talked about things like community service, military service, household service. So the word has a very broad application. We had some discussion, but inconclusive, about whether there was an aspect of obligation to the word to service or to serve. Rebecca, I think, reminded us that the Hebrew word avodah can mean service, but also work and worship. So that's something really to ponder. There are negative or kind of derogatory uses, like in the Bible, where women are commanded to serve their husbands. And that's a use of serve or service that, and also the word servant have kind of derogatory connotations these days. And then it's also really important to think about when we are serving, are we serving others, are we serving God, or how are those two things related? And Randy pointed out that in the Kabbalah, the greater our service to others, the stronger our connection to God. And we did not come up with a definition.
I think you nailed it.
Great.
Goodness, I wish we could talk more and we were looking at the list. But how much do we have more time? Can you all give us a few more minutes, or do you need to run off? All right, I'm seeing some nodding heads. All right, so on the service thing, thank you, Rebecca, for putting up that avodah is, the direct translation is work, but it means in service of assistance to others and religious practice, and how that it's truly, and how it transcends the religious terms into the vernacular as not just work. To serve is deeper than that. So excellent. I really like that.
Awesome.
We can leave these 4 words as we've, as a group, defined them. I think we've already noticed that on some of them we can go deeper or further. Kosher, I think because it's actually come so, well, it has to do with food, and food is so central. We could probably talk about that for a very long time, but I think looking at your list, there's some that we want to save for either a reflection or a blog post, but there's a few that we could probably start to define or talk about right now. Do you want to go first, Sam?
Sure. And we'll do these just really, really quickly because I want to honor people's time. So people asked about kind of Holy Ghost, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. That's sort of that Trinity in Christianity. And they all are 3 separate and all one. It's so confusing and so interesting, and we'll talk more about it soon, but kind of that kind of Holy Ghost, the same thing sort of as Holy Spirit, sort of that kind of connection that connects us to the divine. Transubstantiation is that word for when bread and cup become the literal body of Jesus and the blood of Jesus. Consubstantiation is another word, really meaning kind of that Jesus is above and around kind of the elements. So again, these are really sort of nerdy words that if you went to a church service, you probably wouldn't quite know the difference necessarily. But they are kind of subtle differences within the denomination. So just wanted to share those 2 things real fast. And Debbie?
I'll give a quick go at synagogue and temple, the difference. So synagogue is Greek for house of gathering, which works with the various Hebrew names for synagogue, which is Beit Midrash, house of learning. Goodness, I can't remember all of them. But basically houses of, so gatherings for learning, for praying, for everything, which is a synagogue often has all those. You've got the Hebrew school. I mean, churches are similar. You teach, you gather, you pray. Temple, so traditionally, and this is why conservative and Orthodox really won't use the word temple unless they're referring to the capital T temple that was destroyed in the year 70 and so on and so forth. But as a symbol of the centrality of worship for Judaism, it has been brought in to reform or more progressive Judaism as a place that serves, as a synagogue, as a place that serves for that gathering for community and worship, because to become that central place. So they are the same, they're referring to the same building, and effectively the same concept. It's just showing us how those more progressive denominations have chosen to use terminology differently. So it's a really great question in terms of what the differences are. And the other one that I was gonna Beit Knesset, House of Assembly. Thank you. The chosen people comes up a number of different places in the Bible. Isaiah, I think, mentions it 3 times. Chosen people, the people to light the way, the first among nations. This is Jewish exceptionalism, which I actually take exception to. There's a lot of the traditional, most literal translation is that God chose Abraham's descendants, so the Jews, to lead the rest of the world. Even that explanation leaves room for wiggle room. Lead in what way? Lead by example, lead by thought. Does it mean rule and dominion? Some people say yes. I take the whole chosen people concept to mean the whole world. All people are chosen on an individual level, so long as they choose to better themselves, to learn more, to serve the community. And it's not a religious choice. It's more of a personal, I'm part of this greater humanity and would like to bring it forward. That is my view on it. Universal Judaism rejects Jewish exceptionalism, that it's just Jews. But yes, the traditional conservative, small c, view of it is that the descendants of Abraham are better. I reject that entirely, as do many, many, many people. So it is a tough one. It comes up a lot, and it's when I have to sit there and explain, and I get pushback and acceptance. So, woof. All right.
Ooh. Well, thank you for all the ones you put in, and we've kept that chat, so we will continue to look at those, and just want to share just some concluding thoughts with you guys to take with you as you go. So,
So you go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So, important thing to note is, just when we're saying words, we might assume people know what we mean, and that can feel sometimes a little exclusionary, or we can really get misunderstood. Things can get lost in translation. So remember to really ask those questions and not make those assumptions.
And in terms of not making assumptions, we people have a tendency to speak in code and jargon, and try to hear it in yourself and wonder if and think if the person you're talking to is getting it the way you intend, or maybe they're picking it up in a different way. And so be aware that sometimes clarity will come with more explanation.
Yeah. And as interfaith families, or as part of a kind of an interfaith global community, just continue to have these conversations. You can see all of us sort of seeing the differences between our different upbringings, our different interpretations. So really speak from your experience and really seek understanding from others.
Yep. Keep an open mind, seek understandings, ask the questions. Say, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Always good to pull on somebody else's quotes. So thank you all for joining us today. This was fantastic. Next week, do come back. We'll have Irene Landsman is going to be sharing about her newly published book called The Good Poetic Mother. And I think the take she's going to take on it is how memoir is helpful for the greater community, not just the person writing. So tune in for that. It's going to be amazing. And have a lovely week, everybody.
Yes. Hope to see you guys at Back to Basics Family People of All Ages game night on Wednesday at 7 p.m. It's going to be a whole lot of fun.
Oh, yes. Do that.
Be well, you all. Thank you so much for your participation today. It was wonderful to be with you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Josh.
You always, yeah. Woof.
All right, you can end recording.